So let's talk about the film.
All right. What do we want to talk about?
It's so funny. You're sitting backstage and just chattering, chattering, chattering. And I was like, we're not going to have anything to say when we get out there. I wanted to know how many years was this film in the making, and how did you finance this film and fund it and raise funds for it? Because you weren't James Spooner, as we know you now. So how were you able to get this film made?
And I couldn't finance a film now either. So, um, let's see. I started this film in 2001, and my first screening was in 2003. It was uh, just one of those things where I couldn't fall asleep one night thinking about like my life in the punk scene and how angry I was at like the kids for like not cultivating my identity as a person of color, though I was very active in fighting for the rights of gay people, women, the animals, etc. I didn't feel it returned to me. So I wanted to do something that would be a critique on the punk scene. And so this was 2001. This is kind of pre MySpace. This is pre even DSL. I was still using dial-up. And I used my credit card and I bought what did I do first? I bought a camera, and then I started shooting while I paid off the camera. And then it took me about 6 months, and then I maxed it out again, and I bought a computer, and I got an email address, and I started trying to find black punks outside of New York City.
And so, how were you able to? Because in the closing credits, we see there are people in Alabama, there are people in California, there are people in the Middle America, and you were based in New York. So, how were you able to travel and?
Well, it was first I did a lot of, it was a lot of word of mouth, just trying to find people, right? And so I had this kind of I guess I had a map on the wall, and I was like, okay, there's someone in Ohio, and there's someone in Indiana, and and I was basically creating a tour for myself, and I knew that once I could make it worth it, then I would just get in a car and go. So I just kind of did that with no real thought of how I was going to finance it or anything, and then I got all the people together, and then I had a benefit show, and it got me a few $100s, and I rented a car, and I didn't have insurance, and we just rode dirty, and we just and I interviewed. It was something around 36 people in 28 days. So it's just boom, 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 And yeah, that's what we did.
Wow.
I'm really curious about this too because that moment of the internet uh, and a certain kind of connectivity for people who had been in smaller groups locally, being able to connect through message boards and other things. Were you then a hub as you were going around doing your interviews and letting people know that, hey, I just talked to somebody in this place?
Not yet.
Or, not yet.
I had so at that time, I found most of the people I found were through punkplanet.com, and I can't remember. There was another punk specific message board, and I would just say who's the black guy in your scene? How many, who can think of any bands with black members? And then they would say it, they would write it, and then I would contact that person, So it was very it was like that. Once the film came out, I knew that I was going to, after a couple screenings, I was like, okay, you know what, this could be something. So I had a friend put together a message board for me, and that guy with the super deep voice,
Yeah.
Calvin, he was like, on the message board, like just trying to get people, trying to, and the two of us like really like padded the first, 50 people, and every day I'd be like, oh, 2 more people, and everybody who was on it was just so excited to meet each other that it just kept growing. They kept trying to get more people. It was really like self-propelling, because there was nowhere on the internet like it.
Right.
So it was a very exciting moment.
Cool. It's funny because there are a number of people that I know in the documentary, but I know them like socially, but also just like through zines. So there was a lot of kind of handing out of printed matter and people kind of connecting that way. But I realized I was trying to map like how I actually knew these people from coast to coast, and I can't
The
even
Funky
track
Black
it.
Circle is like hella small. So.
Maybe that's it.
There's so many topics in the film that become springboards for other things, for other conversations. And so I wanted to get your take on a few people in the film basically say that black and punk are synonymous. And I don't think that's so, for a host of reasons, but I wanted to get your take on that sort of configuration.
Okay. So you and I talked a little bit about this backstage, and as I was watching the film again, I was recognizing how specifically Tamar Kali was kind of a proponent of that idea. And in 2001, it was a like outlandish idea to say, like, for the tagline, punk rock is black music, like they put that on the byline of the Japanese release, because it's like, whoa, what, and we have to remember that like this was the jiggy era. Pants were as big as they could be, like there wasn't black skaters, and there, like everything was like, it just felt like it was like black people was like, boom, BET, that's it, So if you were to suggest that black people were anything else, it was like wild, So, so the idea where she says something like, Nina Simone or whatever, it's like, and like I said backstage, Afro-Punk, one of the first shirts I made, it had a picture of Jimi Hendrix and it said, "Fuck Sid, Jimmy is vicious," and it was this kind of idea that like, we've had it all along, But as you said backstage, it also is kind of the demise of, of a particular thing, because it opens the floodgates and allows anybody with a Misfits shirt to be punk, or not even, anyone with a mohawk. And like, there are like 4-year-olds with mohawks. Like that's like a regular, that's a regular black kid haircut now,
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
So,
Yeah.
So now that the door has been kicked wide open, it's like, all right, let's close the door. Let's close the door. Like, all right, here's a new criteria.
Right.
Now that I've got your attention, okay, you guys aren't actually punk. So let me show you what it is, and see if you want to be down.
Well, what I said to James was that when Tamar Kali says that in the film, she's unwittingly writing her own eviction notice from punk. Because when you look at what Afro-Punk has become, it is, anything black, is under the banner, except actual punks, right? So when she was expanding the notion, she was unwittingly setting up the demise of the black punk from the very scene that was their foundation, the very scene that was theirs.
And I like,
And that's not to like shit on her. I mean, as James said, when in 2001 that was a radical notion. It was something, it was provocative. It was a way to expand blackness. It's just sort of boomeranged.
And I'll let you.
okay, and I just want to clarify that Afropunk today, Afropunk was a scene for, if at all, maybe a couple years. Like the first couple years after the film came out, people, like, for a scene to exist, it has to be controlled autonomously by anyone in this room. And it has to happen on a daily basis. You have to be able to like know where to go, be part of a thing, go to shows every weekend, go to different people are putting it on. Afropunk today is a company that's organized by one or two people who make all the decisions. So, so I guess I just want to clarify or like build upon what you're saying, because it's not like she got evicted from the scene because the scene didn't exist. But she's still part of her initial scene.
Right.
Now it's just there's this company that she may or may not play for sometimes.
Yeah, and it's tricky too because, to have the power to kind of tell your own story or write it and not, like how do you kind of figure out a way to not explain, but to kind of even just take your space within a scene. It's not a big leap to kind of pinpoint different people. And for me, Nina Simone I was like, there were other people that I might pinpoint, to kind of create a lineage, and not be just this anomaly, as if, you and your black self popped out of nowhere and ended up in this white scene. It's like, actually, if we start tracing through all of the kinds of things that have happened in music and black people's role in creating American culture, then, like, I get it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you just showed was aiming to do, is like it's a validation of like, hey, like we didn't just show up, we've always been here, and we're peppered through all points of this history. So and we still are. I think that it's what I was trying to accomplish with making this film first was giving a strong critique of the punk scene, and also once I started to see that people, I really thought it would just screen like once or twice and that'd be the end of it. But like once I started seeing that I wasn't preaching to the choir, but there were all these just like regular people who were coming in for one reason or another, then I was like, oh, there's some power here. Like now I can possibly inspire people with the film, with my story, with their story, to do what it is, whatever do the same thing for their story, and like for all the positive things that the Afropunk website and festival bring, I don't know that it encourages people to like now like just get up and tell their story. One of the other first shirts I made, I like to send messages on shirts. One of the other first shirts I made, it said Afropunk, it doesn't say, it said Afropunk, the bands are the fans and the fans are the bands. And that could not have been more true then. But like now I can't even get in, like now, like what VIP, just the fact there is a VIP, like,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? It's like, so, so it's just like, I don't want to sit here and like dump on, the inevitability of like what it became. But what I do want us to walk away from is like, oh, like this guy did this, I can do this. Whether it's make a movie or just put on a show and get the vibe of, to create the energy of whatever it is you're trying to accomplish.
You want to do the
Yeah, I think that's a perfect segue into our the kind of ongoing conversation about Afropunk.
Yeah, James mentioned that he made the film as a kind of critique. And what's been interesting over the last several years, as Afropunk has grown and become whatever it has become, that there is a critique, an ongoing critique. And so what we did was sort of cull through social media over the last few years and sort of try to create sort of like a narrative, a trajectory of Afropunk and what it means, what it means, what it meant, what it no longer means to some people who have embraced Afropunk.
Can we have the projector?
Afropunk was a documentary by James Spooner which detailed the Black punk experience. The Afropunk Festival grew out of this documentary. It was about a specific experience and it has been erased. And when folk lament this loss and refuse to respect this history and this Black experience, the overwhelming response is, get over it. But when Taylor Swift or Katy Perry step out of line, folk are quick to call foul. I feel like I make this thread every couple of years. I recognize I'm beating a long dead horse, but Afropunk was special to me. These subcultures are special to me. These particular corners of the Black experience are special to me. And it's hypocritical for us to talk this game about representation and intersectionality and trample them.
A year ago today, I was at Afropunk, unemployed, when I ran into a Black woman who's over at the education department at the Met for the third time. I said flat out, I need a job. She sent me to meet her colleagues at their booth. Today, I work the same booth with her as a Met employee.
This was just tweeted last week. My partner and I were just escorted out of backstage by 2 large security guards because his shirt reads, Afropunk sold out for white consumption. When I asked the owner why we were being asked to leave, he said, quote, this is my house.
Afropunk kicking out someone for wearing a t-shirt stating Afropunk sold out for white consumption while continuing to tote Black radical and diluted punk traditions as their brand and digital presence is why you lot in the Black capitalist crowd cannot be trusted.
Afropunk attendees say they were kicked out of VIP over this handwritten t-shirt.
Afropunk kicked out a couple for wearing shirts that said Afropunk sold out for white consumption. Meanwhile, their VIP section looks like this.
Motive. Yikes.
Yeah.
That can't be real.
Yeah. Too real. And I have clickers. Oh.
Out here at Afropunk with breakbeat poets and Black Queer Ho. Black Queer Ho is the author Brittany Black Rose Capri, and her book was just recently published, Black Queer Ho, and she tweeted a long stream, she sent a long stream of tweets saying how grateful she was for Afropunk, that it was still providing a space for her as a queer woman, a queer Black woman, to sell her book and to connect with people.
Crazy how non-alternative Black people are complaining about white people invading Afropunk when y'all are invading it too. It wasn't for y'all either, so
It's fun.
When did Afropunk turn into Black Coachella? All these brunch and passport Black people spending 3 days wearing face paint and dancing to music they've never heard.
Dang. Afropunk definitely hasn't been Afropunk for years. The original founder is pissed.
I didn't say nothing.
And although I still enjoy it, it's obvious that it sold out long ago. And let's be real, it was supposed to be for Black punks. It used to be free. And y'all, last year there was so much transphobia and homophobia that I was literally disgusted. The rules were clear. No. Celebs were there, and the cishet men would deny Black trans women photos, etc. Issues. Folks from the New Edition Storycast were the ones being transphobic. Kelly was the one that I literally caught denying a Black trans woman a photo. And for the photos that he did take, before that I noticed he looked at even the cishet women carefully as if he was just making sure. He was making assumptions about who was and what was not cis. I even saw some cishet men laughing. They were there for Solange. There were quite a few celebs there, and truthfully, those who were not celebs but were there only for Solange treated queer folks who were able to be themselves like little weirdos, not in the affirmative way. those who are those who are really familiar with the Afropunk know these rules guidelines because they are plastered everywhere.
No sexism, no racism, no ableism, no ageism, no homophobia, no fatphobia, no transphobia, no hatefulness.
The last few years that I've been able to go, I have enjoyed it because it felt like my personal holiday. It makes me feel like myself, like I'm home. This year I was considering going to Atlanta after seeing what happened to Erica, the woman who with her partner was kicked out for his t-shirt. I refused to. I'm actually disgusted. I also am really thinking about how the punk component of Afropunk is incredibly minimal. So it's not even so it's really not even supposed to be my space either, no matter how much I enjoy that space. But for women or queer folk, the safe space was always meant to be just that, safe.
The original founder of Afropunk, James Spooner, is no longer involved and hasn't been for many years. Whomever threw her out is part of the corporatization of Afropunk and not at all advancing the original vision of creator who would agree with the shirt's message. That person is the co-founder. He's the reason the festival became corporate. James is the filmmaker of Afropunk and created the message board, the original community. Matthew joined in after, and they both co-created the first festival. James walked away from it after the fourth or fifth, and it began getting way more corporate and way less punk after that. I was a part of the original community. I attended the festival in 2006 and 2007. It was grassroots in 2006 and took place at BAM. It became corporate in 2007 thanks to MTV and Puma. Don't believe me. Ask any Afro-punk who was around during that time.
Why do white people want to take up space at Afropunk when they have governor's ball?
And this is from 2 years ago. It was posted by Kendall Simpson, who was a former intern at Afropunk. When I worked for Afropunk, I was told to make our marketing materials appeal more to wider audiences, white folks, by the current head, Matthew Morgan. I don't like someone who has been visibly critical of the Black Lives Matter movement headlining this festival. She's talking about the controversy that arose when MIA was selected to be the headliner in the UK. I don't want it run by a person who has voiced his disregard for Black Americans, turning a profit on our hard work. Afropunk doesn't pay its people. Afropunk is run by an elitist who thinks he is better than us because of his money and proximity to whiteness. Again, I need people of color who are not black to stop piggybacking off the shit we start. We aren't your damn mules. If someone wants to know how this organization is actually run, please feel free to hit me up. This shit ain't for us anymore.
I remember seeing that one. That thread went on 4 weeks.
Yeah,
it was bananas.
It was massive. That's the only thing I could find of it left online, but yeah, it was massive.
Can y'all shut the fuck up about Afropunk, please? If you don't like it, don't go.
So one retweet.
Right? 3 likes.
Well, one of the things that we wanted to do in putting this all together was to show how it's much more complicated than just don't go.
Yeah.
And hopefully some of those reasons came through. But we wanted to give you the chance, because your name was mentioned a couple of times, if there was any misrepresentation of you, if there's anything that is inaccurate, as far as you can tell, that you have the chance. Because as we were going through and pulling these things, your name was mentioned quite a bit, and you weren't chiming in, you weren't there to correct people or to say, okay, you're right about this, you're wrong about that. And so as the myth of Afropunk grows, and as the mythology of who James Spooner is and what he meant, what he intended, sort of grows way beyond anything you're actually saying or doing, just wanted to give you a chance to sort of correct anything in these that might be wrong, or to expand on anything you think was incomplete.
Well, I mean, they painted me as a pretty rad dude, so, yeah, I mean, I think that, I don't know who any of these people are, and I do stay out of it unless asked specifically, because, I don't know, I mean, quite honestly, I go from really, depressed to super angry to, understanding like I have this range of emotions, but none of them are like, yeah, you know. So, um, it's challenging, you know. On top of all of that, like I also don't really talk about how like Matthew and I had an agreement when we split went our separate ways, and he's paid me once in 10 years. So it's like, not that the money would make me like think differently of the festival, but it also just is like insult to injury, you know. So there's things that happen, like most recently, like there's a rewriting of history that happens from the Afropunk like offices,
Right,
you know,
right.
and there seems to be a whole army of like what they call themselves APOGs that like are correcting, you know, which I appreciate because I don't have the energy for. So like most recently, they've they've announced a monthly show or some kind of thing called Liberation Sessions #1. Like this is like the first one. Problem is, as somebody immediately pointed out, holding like 10 flyers, Liberation Sessions had been going on for years under my like curation, I guess. So there's this like steady rewriting, or you know, I've seen articles where Matthew's listed as a co-director, or I've seen now the website has completely removed me from existence, you know. So it's like, you know, there's stuff like that that is like, it's hurtful, but you know, early on somebody told me, you know, for the people that it matters, that it really matters to, they're gonna know, and I know that to be the truth. Like when I think about punk history or whatever, like I know where Malcolm McLaren really was in the equation. You know, like I know whether it was the Ramones or it was the Sex Pistols. Like I know, you know what I'm saying? And I'd like to think I matter. You know, so so I think that like, you know, I think that, you know, if this is important enough to write a history book on, like I'll be in there, you know. And I think that, you know, the world likes an underdog, and I'll probably come off pretty rad, you know. So you know, it's like what am I going to do about all this? Like it's like I don't have the time, energy, or desire to like start a new festival and, you know, whatever. You know, let that for the kids to do, which they're doing.
Yeah, and that's important. You know, like what you said earlier about making sure that people knew and could see modeled that you can do this yourself. You
Yeah.
know,
So
that you can.
every year, multiple times a year, but specifically around the festival, I get emails from people who are like, you know, you should start another one, or you should, like, I wish I was around for the early days and all this stuff. And I always say, like, look, the early days was me calling up 3 bands, booking a like a bar or a hall or something, and like going around to black people and handing out flyers, you know, and then them showing up and us having a party, you know, like you can do that, you know, like if you want to have like a, you know, if you want to have Solange and Erica Badu play your house, like that ain't gonna happen, you know. I mean, it might happen in LA, but not for most of us, you know. Like, but if you want the spirit and the energy of the early days, that's just punk rock, and it happens every day all around the country. It's just happening. I was gonna say it's just happening with white kids, but we're in LA. It's happening with Mexican kids, all over the place. You know, outside of LA, it's happening with white kids all over, and anybody else can do it. You know, so why not you?
Yeah, and you know, it kind of also folds into what we were talking about earlier in terms of how people think about, if they're thinking about success at all. You know, is one thing to kind of take this DIY approach and, you know, make parties happen and have stuff in your backyard or in your house or whatever space you can get your hands on. And it's something else to think about it as a vehicle for celebrity, stardom, and success. And right now, where we're at with all the language around branding and this kind of stuff, building community to do that and having spaces because they're needed is a lot more fraught. There's a lot more careerism of this moment.
Yeah.
But I know there are people that aren't really subscribing to that. But the kind of unspoken expectations around what somebody might really be doing this for in their long game is,
Yeah, I mean,
tricky.
The sad truth is that we live in like, we're currently in a time where, like, pop is everything. It's like, I don't care if you're talking about hip hop or you're talking about heavy metal, like, the biggest bands of those are the pop versions, and that's because that's what record labels feel safe putting money behind, Like, I grew up in a scene where we would make fun of kids who bought records that had barcodes on them. Like, that was being a sellout, So, like, and, like, for those of us who are there, like, it means a lot, So it's funny because I feel like I don't know, man, maybe I drank the what is it called? Like, I drank the Kool-Aid or whatever too, because when I was part of it and it was, like, starting to happen and, like, more kids, and I was seeing, like, an all-black mosh pit, and I was like, holy shit, like, it's an all-black woman mosh pit, holy shit, like, I was like, how do I keep doing this, And then, Matthew, he's by trade a music manager, he's a businessman, like, he has ideas, and ideas are rad, so it's like, all right, how do we do this? And there was a lot of push and pull, but when I stepped away, we were still, like, friendly. And I remember, I'll never forget getting this email one time. He's like, can you look over this attachment and tell me what you think? And it was like 100 questionnaire that he was trying to, he wanted the members of the Afro-Punk community website to fill out so that he could then collect that data, so that he could then go to marketers and say, like, look, see, here's the proof that people will buy your product if you and you know what? It's like, that is happening all the time, everywhere, behind the scenes. But it's not supposed to be happening in a punk thing,
Yeah.
It's not supposed to be happening in, like, a DIY space or anything like that. So it's like, I mean, I could go on forever talking about all kinds of whack stuff that happened behind the scenes. And I don't want this to just be, like, a place to diss, the current incarnation of Afropunk. There are, sure, it's a really great festival if that's what you're into, I think that the other, like, there's also a film we just saw. Come on, let's talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's a lot in that film.
To sort of build a little bit on what you're saying, one of the things I do love about the film is that it really makes clear that, the punk politic has sort of built in for you, not only, that it's, anti-racism, anti-homophobia, anti-fat phobia, all these things that you mentioned, but also it's a built-in critique of the ways in which identity, especially in American culture, identity is so tied to the marketplace, and the way in which our identities, even those of us who think we're being radical and exceptional and out of the box, so much of our identities are being dictated to us, and we're simply we're being radical as being defined by someone else. We're being subversive as subversiveness is being defined by someone else. And I loved in the film the number of kids who were like, I know that I'm probably going to be poor. I know that I'm going to struggle. I know that I'm going to not have an easy way, but that's because I'm making certain, not just artistic choices, but I'm making certain political choices in my life. And I know those choices have consequences. I'm willing to live with those consequences because there's a certain kind of integrity I am aiming for in how I live. And that really comes through in the film. And so I think, for me, one of the great takeaways is to see the politics of the film. I love when Mo says, he's surrounded, by these white boys, and he says, "My music is not for white people. My music is for black people. My music is about the liberation of black people." And to sort of walk that line, and it's a line that a lot of, I think, black people and non-black people of color walk as you're trying to move through the world, and so much of that world you're moving through is not your color, it's not your culture, and you're having to navigate it and get what you want by working with people who may not necessarily be, of your tribe. And so there are all these layers in the film that I think are really, really wonderful and profound and deep, but they're conveyed in a way that is very accessible. It's not theory, it's not didactic.
Yeah, it's not academic.
Right,
It's
right,
kids
right.
speaking from their heart.
Exactly.
And I think that, to go off of what he's saying, one interesting thing is to see it 15 years later. Like, I still know a number of the people who are involved, and I can tell you how they've taken those ideals into adulthood, because now they're all in their 40s, right? Or in and around. So, like, Mo was like a very active behind-the-scenes member of the Black Lives Matter movement. There's like a whole kind of six to eight person group who actually like makes a lot of decisions, and he was one of the founders of that. Now he's the leader of the Working Families Party, which was like a huge deal. So he's like sitting down with Bernie Sanders and like talking shop, And Tamar Kali is a composer. She composed Mudbound, and still very much like grinding on her own, Even me, like I've never given up, and I've been a tattoo artist for like 10 years, and I mean, my girlfriend will tell you I bring very little financially to the table, but I do bring integrity, So I think that like these aren't just like lofty kid values.
Yeah.
There is a way to like bring them into real life.
I think one of my favorite parts, and it's a very painful part of the film, is when the young woman, I forget her name, what's her name?
Okay.
Mariko. He knows where I'm going with this. When she's half Asian, half black, and she's talking about the ways in which her non-black mother has told her, black men are no good. They do these drugs and all these things, and you're
They're not
watching
gonna pay
this.
rent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're watching
I do
this.
pay rent.
But you're watching this, and I thought, this is really, I would pull this segment out if I were like leading any sort of discussion on race in America, and this notion that if people fuck across racial lines and have these cute little biracial babies, that the race issue will be resolved, right? Instead of realizing that what you're doing is passing on these fucked up politics to people who are biracial, right? I thought that was, it's a really painful part of the film to watch, and actually her entire narrative. And I had to remind myself to be patient with this person who has been conditioned by not only a mother who had very fucked up racial attitudes about the man she married and had a child with, but also, what is this black man? What is he teaching his child about blackness and black culture and black people? And what is his responsibility in correcting the bullshit that her mother is teaching her? So that's one of those things I was saying, that there's so many amazing layers of conversation in the film, and I think Mariko is a figure who first response might be to recoil, but then you look at her and you realize that this, in some ways, that this great future that we're supposed to have, where everyone is beige, and that we've just, somehow achieved some sort of racial consciousness or political awareness, and that's not going to happen without work. You got to do more than fuck and have children to bring about that
Clearly.
progressive racial future. And I think in so many ways, I mean, this is California. It's filled with Maricos, right? So that's one of those conversations that the film sparks, I think, about race, that goes beyond just, the scene, the Afro-Punk scene, but the much larger questions of race and racial identity and racial progress in this country.
Yeah, and it's not just, I mean, her story definitely is a flashpoint, but it's echoed by so many, like just about everybody in the film, especially in terms of, fucking with black people, literally and figuratively, like what that's about, not being attracted to other black people, whether or not you talk to other black people when you see them at a punk show or anywhere, and doing this kind of very awkward or very deliberate dance towards or around blackness and black people. And, that to me, kind of coming out of questions around, you know, I don't, I'm not, I know that I am not I don't want to fit into this kind of prescribed notion of blackness that's being handed to me from wherever, from my parents, from my friends, from the media, and how do you find company in that? And how does that kind of affect or warp your own sexuality and sensuality, like your sense of like the kind of humanity and the attractiveness of other people? And I thought that was a really interesting and fraught part of life and the documentary in terms of like, one of the big keywords of punk, if you're studying it like that, being alienated, it's like from what and from who, and like what does that mean? And so like Afropunk, all of these tweets and everything, it goes deep, because for people to finally find each other and feel like they can party together, that scene with Tamar Kali, and there's like all these black people in front of her, like just digging her music, and they're in this really intimate space, is amazing. And to kind of, I'm really just so curious about how people who were in the film kind of reflected on the whole of it and the aftermath. So we have these tweets about the festival, and we have these tweets about, how invested and how important Afropunk was. But that other life-changing piece, because we did hear a lot of really layered stuff about life, like how that shifted now that people have the means to be connected.
Well, I have a few things to say to that. First, I always have to rise to Mariko's defense, because and I did it while I was interviewing her too. It's like I knew that she existed before I've ever met her. I knew that I would find somebody in the scene who would have these kind of attitudes and be willing to talk about them, And I knew that because I was like that at one point. And I think that part of the, I think that as black people, living amongst white supremacy, you can't help but like be almost born into some kind of self-hate, and you have to do work. And all of the people in this film are young. Mariko might have been like 19, and she had the upbringing that you saw, that you just described. So she hasn't had an opportunity to like go to college and like, show up and be all amongst all these black people and then be hella angry and then be like, the baddest black bitch on the campus, like that hasn't happened yet. Like, I don't know what actually happened to her, but I know that the trajectory of a lot of like really important, powerful black figures starts right here. So I first like want to, I always want to put that out there, because I know that this is the only representation of her, and she might be a completely different person now. One can only hope. To answer your question about the reaction, I don't know if Twitter was a thing after the film came out, but it was a life-changing thing. And I was very proud to be, like as a kid having these records that were like, I drop the needle and you listen to these lyrics and it's like, welcome to America, you have the right to be beaten. And I'm like, yes, that's my shit, and like have all of these things like that. And then have kids tell me that the film did that for them, was very humbling, brought me to tears sometimes. And to get emails daily, was amazing. So I love that like all these years later, it can still screen. There can be all these people who haven't seen it, and it still have some poignancy. Is amazing.
Should we open up for questions?
Yeah. So we're going to open up for questions from you guys now, questions or comments. Our only request is that your questions actually be questions, and that we don't have a lot of soliloquies, monologues.
Look, everyone's going to leave now. They're just like, I came here to talk.
And so ushers are in the audience and will come around if you raise your hand if you have a question or a comment.
Hello. Oh, hi. Thanks so much for making this film and for being here to share it with us. Sorry, I'm a little sick. I just want to say a really quick comment about that experience that you guys are just talking about. What's her name?
Mariko?
Mariko. She was really cool, but I also kind of noticed that she was kind of like the lone wolf, in comparison with the other stories. Like it seemed like other people were always like surrounded by their friends or something, but like she kind of was always alone. But that was just a comment I was thinking about when you guys were talking about it. My question was, how did you feel about like connecting all these dots when so many people had the same answers for your questions? Part of that editing we can see like just back to back, like people having the same answers. Like how did that feel to you? And if you had those same answers yourself for those questions?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, clearly I did this editing style of like repetition, and that was to like drive the point home that like people from all over the country of all different looks were saying the same thing. And it was exciting, I mean, it's definitely like, holy shit, there's fucking 8 people saying this. Or like, what are the odds of 2 people saying punk rock is black music? I mean, that would be the only 2 people in history to say those words. It's just like, it was amazing. And, as far as like my own answers, I came to everybody with 10 questions, and I knew the answers to all of them. The only thing that I was surprised by in the whole movie was the part where they're talking about seeing other black people at shows and not talking to them or feeling like they're supposed to be the only one. And when they started saying it, I was like, ooh, yeah, I know that feeling. Like I've been on both sides of that. I don't want to like, yeah, she's fine, but I don't want to go talk to her because everybody's going to be like, oh yeah, the 2 black people, So like that kind of stuff I wasn't prepared for, but then when I saw it, I was like, yes. And people kept talking about it, So, it's pretty rad.
There's a couple of questions up back.
And over here.
A documentary filmmaker especially is a kind of therapist or psychologist potentially, the way in which you interact with your subjects. You're an incredibly young man when you made this film. When you're hearing some of these stories, was it sometimes overwhelming? Was it sometimes like a lot for you to process or to sort of work through as you're documenting other people's? Because there's a lot of trauma,
Yeah.
There's a lot of isolation, there's a lot of...
Listen, as a human, I am wrought with problems, with issues. Like, yes. But I will tell you that I got over my identity issues with the film and the subsequent screening of it. I mean, this was like I was a DJ, so when I made this film, so I would like basically edit for like 8 hours a day and then to go do my gig. And so I'm just like listening to, I mean, there's 98 people in this film, over listening to them over and putting together these things, and it really like was validating, because I was filled with identity issues, being light skinned, being mixed race, being immigrant, like all of these stuff, and also then screening it and meeting so many people afterwards and being like, oh my God, that's my story too. And like, I don't know anything about punk, but I'm the only black person on my floor at my bank, or whatever. And it's like, oh shoot, this is like, the moment that I realized that there's like the black experience and then there's the other black experience, I was like, oh, all right, I'm fitting into one of these, so I'm cool. Like,
Thank you very much for the film.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask what punk means to you today, what your politics are around punk, because we see, again, the conversion, as you were all talking about, of punk into a fashion or into a commoditized entity. So what does it mean to you?
well, I mean, I think that this film is like basically my manifesto. It, though I'm not in it, I am it. I always say it would be really boring to watch me talk for an hour, but you know, I basically told my life story through there, and now I'm in my 40s and I have kids, and I have so I have responsibilities and whatnot, but I'm still like very DIY. I'm still like I don't have like it's very challenging for me to be like money focused or for like I just want to make art, and like oftentimes to the detriment of the people, my loved ones, like I just want to keep it real, like there's this I was reading the other day on one of these threads, and I wholeheartedly agree. There needs to be a word reintroduced to the English language. Poser, sellout. You remember those when those were like the worst things that anyone could call you? If you're like in your 40s, like, yo, poser? But now I feel like people aspire to be posers. They like aspire to be a sellout. Like how soon can I sell out? And it's all good. You can just go to, like, I won't let my daughter wear the T-shirt of a band that she doesn't know. You know what I'm saying? Like, yes, you can buy a Misfits T-shirt at like,
Hot Topic.
Forget Hot Topic. I mean, like at Old Navy.
Yeah. Target.
Yeah. But nah, you're not doing that until you know about it. You know what I'm saying? Like, let's just stick with the Katy Perry shirt. Like, yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like, at least you know those songs.
Well, then basically what you're saying is you're also one of those kids who brought the politics of their youth into adulthood.
Yeah, I bought in, like, I don't want to sit here and like sound high and mighty, but it's just like, yo, like when I was 16, I found out about like animal rights and how factory farms and all that stuff, and everybody in the punk scene were vegan, and I'm like, fuck yeah. And like I'm still vegan because that shit didn't go away, like the politics haven't changed, so it's like I didn't know about trans people in the 90s. We weren't like talking about that in that way, but I was ready for it, like I was already like queer positive, so tell me about a new kind of queer. Oh, okay, like cool, like it's just not to say that trans people are new. I'm sorry, like, but you know what I'm saying. Like, it's just like all the politics that punk rock gives. Like, I like bought it. Like I didn't want to be a poser. I wanted to learn about it. I actually was about it, and then I stayed about it.
Any other questions or comments?
Hi, I wanted to start with saying thank you for this. My friend really fast wants to know, this isn't my question, but do you still do tattoos? Like,
I do tattoos, and I
Where?
have flyers up here.
okay,
This
for
is
sure.
little-
We're gonna come get them after.
They are vegan tattoos as well. So
So my actual question was, so I started college and I started this like process of like unlearning and deconstructing like hegemonic paradigms in my mind, and I was really fascinated with Mariko's story and like really pained by some of the stuff she said, but like as I'm watching the film and hearing about like acceptance and like the Black punk scene being about acceptance and like how do I facilitate spaces that like people feel comfortable being who they are while also not allowing like really toxic like ideals to like perpetuate, you know? Like how do you balance that, like, yeah, you be who you are, but like this is like self-hatred or like this is really like a shitty like mindset to have, you know?
do you mean like on a personal level or on a public, like on like how do you keep the like transphobic people out of the space?
Yeah,
Or-
I guess so.
Well, I mean, okay, so for instance, the huge signs, the know this, know that signs that are at Afropunk is like right on. Awesome. But you also have to be consistent. So like you can't have CeeLo, who is like a admitted rapist, on stage as your headliner. You can't have like, I mean, as much as I love like Ice Cube Predator from back in the day or something. You can't have Ice Cube headlining because he made his entire living off of misogyny, you know, the hip hop stuff. Like, so you have to like be consistent. So my last Afropunk festival, which was the fourth one, it was like the first corporate one. I didn't really have a whole lot to do with programming a lot of it. Long story, but I didn't do a lot of it. And there was one day that was set aside for live hip hop art acts. So they had bands and whatever. This one band, two different acts did. One act said something that was homophobic. I can't remember what it was. And then the next act did like a reggae medley. And one of the songs was Boom Bye Bye. And I'm like sitting out in the crowd, like appalled, embarrassed, like this is not my Afropunk, you know? And I'm standing next to two queer folks and I'm just like, they're trying to keep it cool, like whatever, you know? So I got up on stage after their show and I just called them out on stage in front of them, in front of the whole crowd, you know? And like, be damned what the consequences are, you know? And it like ended up being really cool. Like they actually didn't even, at least they said they didn't understand the meaning and they were just, paying tribute to these different artists, blah, blah, whatever. Point is consistency, you know? So, not to be too long-winded, but just to give an example, I remember going to a show when I was a teenager. I vividly remember this kid coming who wasn't not a regular in our scene, but everybody's welcome, whatever. He came in, he took off his jacket, and he was like in the pit. And then when we noticed that on his shirt, it said, "Silly faggot, dicks are for chicks." And let me tell you that within 30 minutes of being like screamed at by the entire, he walked out of there without a shirt on. Not because he was like forced into, like he took it off and walked and left, like completely embarrassed. And like that's what you have to require of your community, you know?
And of yourself,
Yeah,
right?
even if it was just one person, like, because oftentimes it just takes one person to speak up and then the other people are like, hey, yeah, like, if you're in the right scene. And if it's your scene, then you helped put it together, you know?
Any other comments or questions before we wrap it up for the night?
This is being streamed, I think, so they want you to talk into the mic.
I'm curious. I don't remember the name of the director. I'm curious if you have any idea or have ever had any ideas of maybe going back and revisiting some of these people and seeing where they're at, and maybe doing the 20-year anniversary catch up to get up thing.
I mean, I do keep in touch with a lot of people via social media, and if people come to town, I'll hang out with them or whatever. Like, as far as stuff publicly, like, I don't know. I feel like if I was a different kind of person, I would probably be, or if there was two of me, I would like do something like that, because it would be cool. I'd like to see it. I'm dying for somebody else to make an Afro-Punk documentary that like does that kind of, something like that. But I'm just beginning a graphic novel. I got like 2 years worth of drawing ahead of me. Like, I can't, like, my girlfriend is always like, you should do this, you should do that. And I'm like, yeah, I'll put that on the list right after all the other stuff, So, if you're a filmmaker, we can talk and maybe you could do it.
What music are you listening to now?
I've really been revisiting the 70s, like, London punk scene and goth, like early goth, post-punk stuff. And I'm trying to keep up with like stuff that's happening now, or like to a degree. I just like, as far as like relevancy, so there's a festival, a POC hardcore festival called the Break Free Fest. It's a bit of a tongue twister. But on the cover of Maximum Rock and Roll, which is like this like legendary punk zine, is a shot from the festival, and there's a black band called Soul Glow that is like the first band I would book if I was doing my own thing, super good. There's another POC band called the Downtown Boys that I highly recommend. Even if you're like not into super hard stuff, like, you probably can find it in your ears to listen to them. They're really great. And like, I'm a summer programmer at the Broad Museum, so like just last week I brought 3 punk bands from China, and that was really fun. So I'm just like, I don't have to keep up the way that I used to, but I'm still listening.
All right, well, thank you guys for coming out.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for sticking around. And I'll like hang if anybody A, wants a flyer, or B, just wants to like say something they don't want to say in front of everybody. Thanks.